I suppose we can start. Thank you to all of you that are joining us. Not so many of you, but let's keep this discussion substantial. We don't need too many people to have an expert and argumented debate. This is the session on service delivery and digitalization. We already heard several inputs from and several findings from the PAR monitor, but we will hear a bit more details from our colleague. My name is Iskra Belcheva Ristovska from the Center for Change Management from Macedonia. We've been working on public administration reform, and I'm very happy to be participating in the Weber conference. To kick off, before discussing this area with the representatives of the European Union delegation in Podgorica and also with the Sigma representative, I would invite Mr. Haris Ćutahija to present the findings from this area in the PAR monitor. Please.
Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone. Not many of us here, but that's okay. I'm aware that we had lunch, we had another breakout session, first round. So I'll try to keep it as short as I can, since you already heard the main findings by Miloš and two Milicas earlier. So when it comes to the service delivery and the digitalization, we have covered, as in other areas, all 6 Western Balkans administrations and focused on 3 sub-indicators. It includes citizen-centric service delivery, service accessibility and availability of information of services, and at last, the digitalization of service delivery. These findings reflect the developments since the previous monitoring cycle and cover the period from the second half of 2000. I'm sorry. In this presentation, we have organized it in 4 parts. I'm sorry, I just have this throat problem. First, I will briefly explain the approach used in the assessment. Then I will present the overall results for the Western Balkans. After that, I will focus on the main findings related to the 3 sub-indicators monitored. And finally, I will conclude with several priorities that for the future reforms. First of all, we have examined 5 different aspects. These include strategy and policy, legislation, institutional arrangements, implementation practice, and outcomes and impacts. To assess the implementation practice, we have observed the same 7 administrative services in all the Western Balkans countries. These include property registration, company registration, vehicle registration, passport and ID issuance, VAT, declaration and payment. In addition, we also conducted interviews with key non-state actors and used public perception survey results in order to assess the outcomes of these reforms. This is the overall score. You can see it's not that it's not that high. However, you can see also the difference if you look at the report that you can take from the desk in front. There is a difference between countries. Overall, Bosnia and Herzegovina, my country, is the weakest. This is a round number. when you can see the last, it's actually 35.6, and the best results were in Albania with 57.25 points. First of all, the first sub-indicator is a citizen-centric service delivery in practice. Across the region, strategic documents generally include measures aimed at promoting citizens-centered service design and delivery. These measures actually focus on end-user involvement, improved user interfaces, digitalization, accessibility, and more user-friendly services. This actually demonstrates that administrations increasingly recognize the importance of designing services around citizens' needs. However, these strategic commitments have not been fully translated into legislation. Legal frameworks rarely establish binding obligation to design services based on user needs. Likewise, regulations generally do not require institutions to systematically collect and publish information on the citizens' participation in service designs. Although once only principle is recognized in most administrations across the region, and its implementation, however, remains limited. When we look at practice, the picture becomes even less encouraging. Feedback mechanisms remain underdeveloped across the region, especially in my country. You can see that some of the institutions actually have that polls on their websites, but we can't see how they use it, and you can't see any results of those polls. Also, the information of, as I said, is largely absent, and even where feedback mechanisms exist, there's very limited evidence that collected feedback is used to improve services, as I said, for the case of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Also, the interviews with key non-state actors revealed widespread perceptions that service delivery is not sufficiently citizen-centered. I will also use the example of Bosnia and Herzegovina. We actually can see lots of information on the websites, but the language is really technical, and you have to be, I think, or either highly educated or work in the field to understand what they are saying. When it comes to the service accessibility and availability of services, you can see the Western Balkan average, also not very high, 27 out of 50. The best is Serbia in this area with 34.5, and Bosnia and Herzegovina is the weakest as before with this average. Strategic frameworks throughout the region generally include measures aimed at improving accessibility and simplifying procedures. Institutional responsibilities are clearly defined, and administrations recognize the importance of improving the user experience, but still gaps remain. legal frameworks rarely established mandatory one-stop shops or live events based service delivery. Regulation also provide only limited guarantees regarding accessibility for the vulnerable groups, and also provisions concerning alternative formats of and specialized staff training also remained absent. And when we are looking at practical implementation, the findings are in this case somewhat mixed. Basic information are mostly available, but citizens-friendly guidance is mostly absent. So, as I said, there's a lot of information, but not in a citizen-friendly manner. I will go on to the digitalization of service delivery. You can see the average. The best in this case, in this case is Albania, and last is not Bosnia and Herzegovina this time, but it's Kosovo and Montenegro, luckily for my country. All Western Balkans administrations have actually adopted strategic and legal framework for the digitalization of services. Even the institutional responsibilities have been assigned. At the same time, the level of digital transformations has been different across the region. User-oriented digital platforms have been established to different degrees, leading to uneven access and quality of digital service. Once again, I will use the example of my own country and say that Bosnia and Herzegovina has had as the first country in the region, we had the legal framework for the digital signature, and it was like 20 years ago, and it's put into effect like a year or two. And at this time, you can't really use it for anything. You can, theoretically, but you still have to send the sign forms and stuff like that. So you can see the difference between the legislation and the implementation of that legislation. When it comes to the digital tools and digital services, as I said, it also remains uneven. Electronic payments are available only for a limited number of services across the region. Many administrative procedures still rely on traditional methods of payments and service delivery. And as I mentioned, the frameworks regulating the e-signatures and e-payments, their implementation still remains uneven. Also, the interviews with the non-key actors actually show that the interviewees think that vulnerable groups and other face difficulties accessing the digital services. There's also this problem of limited digital literacy, insufficient infrastructure and fragmented service delivery. It continues to be an important obstacle. So these are the key findings that I already passed through, because those 3 slides that I had included the points. so I will skip it. And I will go to the priorities for going forward. So, based on all these findings, some of the several priorities emerge. You can see it's strengthening the practical implementation of once-only principle, introduce legal requirements for systematic collection and publication of user feedback, because we, as I said, concluded that most of the institutions don't use the feedback, even though they have it, or they maybe do, but we can't find any evidence that they do. Also improve accessibility of services, especially for the vulnerable groups. Also ensure citizen-friendly presentation of service information. That's also one fact that I repeated several times. Also strengthen interoperability and the use of digital enablers. Expand the availability of electronic payments. Also invest in digital infrastructure and user-oriented platforms. Promote integrated and seamless access to public services. Strengthen live event and one-stop shop approaches, and lastly, ensure that digital transformation is accompanied by continuous monitoring of user satisfaction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Haris. I find it that this area is already being pushed forward, especially since the pandemic, with fast tracking through digitalization. I mean, this was enforced on the entire world, not just on the Western Balkans, so everybody has advanced with the advancement of technology. But I find it also appalling that still so many of the citizens are reporting that they need to deliver documents that are already presented by institutions, other institutions, and also that citizens consider the services not to be equally accessible, both for in-person services, but also for digital services. So accessibility is still key, and this is something that we need to have in mind going forward. Maybe just to add on to the points that you presented here, the priorities going forward should also include some kind of strengthening of digital skills of citizens, because digital skills are of course essential. Even if we have all the enablers put by the institutions in society, we still need to have citizens that will be using them. So without further ado, it is great that we see the PAR monitor greatly following the Sigma principles. So we have with us Bruno Monteiro, a representative of Sigma, which is the initiative of OECD and the European Union. I think maybe you could provide us with your insights on what has been presented as a finding in the PAR monitor, maybe talk about the challenges, but also the opportunities that you see here for the Western Balkans. Please.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for all of you for joining today, for staying in the conference, and I hope we have the chance at the end to exchange some ideas, and when we open the floor for questions. Thank you, Iskra, for organizing the panel and for preparing that question. I think it's a very important question. In the morning, I already thanked Weber for the organization, and I congratulated the Weber for the 10th anniversary. It's an important moment. So regarding the results we just heard, I have one comment and one question. So the comment, I think, is my attempt to connect the micro level where we move it many times when we discuss human-centered design. We try to focus on satisfaction, we try to focus on specific service, so we try to sometimes approach human-centered design with this methodological approach that put us in a very, I will say, situated context. I want to discuss that level of discussion with the more, I will say, encompassing question regarding trust in government and governance structures, because I think they are intimately related, and as I will show. So, first thing to share about this report is that I think it's a great way not just to keep consistency with the Sigma principles, but also to complement the work that the Sigma assessments are doing. I think it's a great way for us to play them together, and I think they kind of reinforce each other. I think it's, in particular, the fact that you bring the civil society organization perspective, I think it's an enriching contribution. So one of the interesting things that you said is that there is a gap between formal commitments and administrative practices. And these, of course, translate in many cases that citizens and civil society organizations do not see the impact of their contributions. So they are invited, or the opportunity for them to contribute exists, but then there is no follow-up where they can really kind of keep the traceability of their contributions, of their engagement. So this is something they're observed. There is also this observation that data is missing, so there is no systematic monitoring of these contributions. But what I found really, really interesting is the fact that you mentioned somewhere that in Western Balkans, citizens feel largely excluded for shaping public services, with an average of 54% do not believe they can influence service development. This is extremely important, not just because it says something about, again, the design of the services, but because I think, and I will invite you to think with me about this says something, or may say something, about the larger question about citizen trust in government. The OECD Drivers of Trust survey that was conducted in 2024 shows that the largest truth gaps that exist, that means the people that more support the government in opposition for the ones who distrust more the government, the largest trust gaps are, you can find them in the sense of having a say in government actions. That means people that feel that governments are open up and are creating opportunities for them to have a say are the ones who trust the most the government. And this is a stronger indicator of trust than, for instance, social condition. This is a stronger predictor, if you want, than gender. So that says something, I think, really interesting, because when we look at the Western Balkans and we see that a majority of people do not believe they can influence the way services are designed, this may point to the very fabric of the social contract that exists in our societies. And this is extremely important when we know that we have here usually a kind of catch-22, because for human-centered design to work, people need to participate. But for people to participate, people need to have trust in government. But for having trust in government, as we can see, you need to have human-centered principles being adapted. So where are you going to? You have a chicken and egg situation here, and I will invite us to think together a little bit about this, what this can tell us about democratic governance, what this can tell us about the presence of strong institutions, and how can we explore this chicken and egg situation or question to the benefit of our administrations and societies. So this is one question. The second one is a very impressive result that you also show about service information and accessibility of services. You know, there is something, this indication that 56% states that information and guidance are easy to find, and 58 affirming the accessibility of in-person and online services is there. So my question for you, don't see it as a provocation, it's obviously a question, is how much can we say about accessibility when we are asking the public in general about accessibility? And I'm saying this because the European Commission has been insisting on this idea of targeting services, asking the users of that specific service, having in mind that people with lived experience are the ones that are better equipped to answer about accessibility and the easiness of access of information. What I want to tell you is that if we are asking people in general, we know that citizens do not exist. We need to ask people that are in specific situations. We need to ask people, for instance, with disabilities. So I wonder if the results will be the same if we account for these different profiles of users that are absolutely influential in the way we design services. We don't have generic services. We have services that are going to meet different segments of population. And this is something extremely important. Just to mention that last week, there is this very important meeting in Sevilla about health services. And what the topics under discussion by the Irish Minister of Health was precisely that health services are shifting beyond traditional consultation models towards co-production, where patients play an active role in shaping policies and services. So we are not talking people in general. We are talking about people with specific conditions. So I want to share these questions with you. The first one is how much these results about the fact that people consider to have or not a saying on the way services are done influence trust in government, because it's a topic that I didn't see discussed here, and there are, as I say, on the OECD and the European Commission, there is research, there is instruments that are thinking about this connection. And the second one about how far can we go about assessing easiness and accessibility if we are not targeting specific audiences for those services. I will stop here with these two questions, and I hope we have the chance of continuing the conversation.
Thank you for this food for thought. I think this will provoke maybe some reactions from the public. But next I would like to invite Mr. Orlando Fusco, who is a representative of the EU delegation in Podgorica, to give us maybe the EU overview of what we just saw in terms of findings in the PAR monitor, because PAR is of course part of the fundamentals. It's a priority for the EU. Obviously now we see it mentioned in the new non-paper that was just leaked to the press, as I saw it yesterday in the news. How is this overall progress assessed by the EU, and what is actually the importance that the EU is paying on digitalization and improving services?
Okay,
Please.
thank you, Iskra. And last speaker of the last panel of a very long day, although interesting. So please bear with me. And from my side, if you allow me, I would try to speak from a combination of different roles, perhaps as, of course, a representative of the EU, but maybe to offer some food for thought and maybe even some anecdotes and for further consideration. Also, as an individual myself, my country is Italy, so I can tell you perhaps that not even in the EU and certainly not in Italy, public administration is far from perfect. And also as a program manager, policy officer on public administration reform, following inter alia also electronic public services. So I think with this combination, maybe I managed to intrigue you at least to some extent. And I hope I will be able to cover maybe 4 aspects relatively quickly. One is a couple of reactions, maybe myself, to the findings of the report. And then, as the moderator asked, maybe to give you a bit of EU context, what is happening at the EU level, and also in terms of EU, how much assistance we provide. On that, I cannot really speak for every country, of course, but I will use Montenegro, that I know the best, obviously, as an example. And in other countries, probably we are doing similar things. And I will conclude maybe with some sort of takeaways that I chewed while preparing for this discussion and listening to the presentations earlier on today. But first of all, I want to thank you for the invitation, for the opportunity to speak in particular in this panel, and to congratulate, of course, Weber for the 10th anniversary and for this new set of very wealthy of information reports. I also would like to say, this I immediately start from the angle of being a program manager and a policy officer on par. If anyone believes that these reports are going to stay on the shelves, I think is not on the right track. As we heard today, in terms of institutions, many people use it, thanks God. We heard in Montenegro it is being used. I'm a witness of that. Of course, it doesn't mean that everything that is said is going to be fulfilled, but it's being used. Maybe in other cases they don't read it at all, but speaking from the perspective of the EU, I can tell you that your time, and I guess there are many representatives of NGOs in different countries that contributed to these reports. We do read it, we do use it. I'm currently drafting my part for the country report 2026. I wouldn't be surprised if something, not literally obviously, but along the lines of what is being discussed, would actually appear in some of these reports. And the same goes for policy dialogues. When we talk with the institutions, we use a lot civil society input. So it is extremely important, and I thank you not only for the conference, but also for this material that you provide on a constant basis. Service delivery is probably the least abstract of public administration reform, that in its totality is actually quite abstract and difficult to explain, and let alone to sell to anybody. But for the citizens, is very concrete, as we know, because we are all citizens. And I don't need to explain that it is like we take a day off work to do something, to receive a service, or we do it in 5 minutes online, and things like that. So it's extremely concrete, and this is the way we approach it from the EU perspective. Not a technical matter, but very practical for how much citizens trust the institutions, our rights being accessible or not in everyday life, and whether the European path produces real improvements beyond laws, strategies, and action plans. So it is central for citizens as much as it is central for the EU accession process. And we heard part being in the fundamentals, part being included under the benchmarks of Chapter 23 in terms of negotiation process. This has happened in Montenegro for the first time, and I guess that the countries that will come will probably see a similar dynamic with entrenching a fundamental in one of the most important chapters, as we know, 23, 24, of the accession negotiations, which are usually the first to open and the last to close. So after this little introduction, allow me some reflection on the findings. I saw two that for me are not really going in parallel. And it is about the fact that, this strategy and all these papers do not have enough evidence that these services are being systematically improved based on performance data and citizen feedback. This is probably not so striking. It is the usual gap that we have in implementation everywhere, but it is concerning, and I think that the idea of citizens first is present in strategies, as we know, but it is not fully translated into the measurable results. And when I hear, I think also before it was recalled, the majority of citizens, 54% in the Western Balkans, on average, do not believe that they can influence the development of public services. This is one data. On the other hand, almost following, there is the statement that there are no legal obligation to include citizens in design processes. I would argue that we need to be very careful to put the two in a direct relation. I think that you may have the same result or even higher of people believing that they cannot influence, even if legal obligation would be in place. I don't think it's a matter of legal obligation, although we know in certain situations it can help, but in the long run, it is, this morning someone recalled the need of change institutional culture. As long as the institutions will not realize deeply that it is in their interest to listen to civil society, to citizens, to design the services, with or without legal obligations, we have actually not resolved this matter. This is therefore something that I don't think goes in pair. The second point I would like to emphasize is that 67% of citizens say that they had to submit documents already held by the government. Here the anecdote being an Italian. A few years ago, I'm sure it changed now, but a few years ago, it's a fact, I was looking for a certificate of marriage, my own marriage, because they needed, I don't know for what reason, in some institution, this paper. And it was in the computer, but they could not find the physical paper in the archive, a huge room, huge cupboard, millions of papers. And I was wondering, why do they need, first of all, the certificate? Because it's recorded in the electronic system, so they already have it. And even more, why do they need the bloody paper, you know? And of course, I got no answer to this. And to conclude this second point, the paper had ended up behind the cupboard, lying on the floor between the wall and the cupboard itself. It took my father, which was my envoy because I'm abroad, going to the Questura Centrale in Italy 6 or 7 times physically to beg these employees that we needed this document. I mean, it's completely ridiculous, but it is true. I'm sure it changed, but I want to tell you this just to, let's say, ease the pain. This region is not alone with these challenges. Also in the EU, we have situations which, of course, need improvement. Third point about the comments from the report. This is about accessibility. Fewer than half of citizens, if I'm not wrong, find digital access to services easy. Means that the other half find it difficult. This is the part I would emphasize, because we are not here to please ourselves. We are here to constructively, critically find the areas for improvement and try to present some solution. So this is a problem, and it is a problem also in the case of Montenegro. Lots of services are being developed, but they are extremely difficult to access. So what's the point of developing more and more services, and we are helping on that, if these services then are not made easily accessible to people? The example of his country, Portugal, which I was privileged to visit recently, is maybe too much in the EU. They are front runners, let alone in the region. But it tells us that it is possible to have physical locations. They have one-stop shops, hundreds of them across the country. They have telephone access. So this is how they provide services to citizens. Physically, telephone, portal, you correct me if I'm wrong, and mobile application. So in Montenegro, for instance, which is front runner on the EU, but it's not front runner in this particular topic, unfortunately, we have a portal. We don't have one-stop shops, we don't have telephone access, we don't have mobile app, and the same situation more or less is in the other countries of the Western Balkan. A portal which is almost mission impossible to access. You have an electronic ID card, which you have to activate, not only to pick up. You have to activate, and then you need the card reader to use it. I have young local people working with me from Montenegro, not any ordinary citizen or elderly person, that needed days and days to manage. This is not very user-friendly. Final point on this, institutional setup. I don't think we have spoke a lot about this today. Another finding of the report. It's very important. This is not one ministry job, the digital, the electronic service. This is the whole of government, and this is the closer, the better to the center of power. If you have it as a priority of one ministry trying to coordinate on the equal foot with the others, it's extremely complicated to advance the reform. Where we have, on the contrary, in the region, like Albania, for instance, I spent 6 years there before my mandate in Podgorica, this very close to the Prime Minister office with the very clear institutional strong setup, it moves much faster. From the EU perspective, 2030 Digital Compass, 4 cardinal points. Digital skills, mentioned already, also now, secure and sustainable digital infrastructure, digital transformation of businesses, and digitalization of public services. So what we are asking the Balkans, we are actually asking ourselves. And again, with very, very concrete things to be done by 2030. On public services, the target is that all key public services should be available online, all citizens should have access to their e-medical records, and 80% of citizens should use an electronic ID solution. In terms of funding, to back this up, you know that the Recovery and Resilience Facility is very much centered around also the digital priority. At least 20% of this expenditure goes to digital objectives. In practice, nowadays, it's about 26% of the total funds, and the total funds are 150 billion euros. So this is the relevance at the EU level in terms of policy and in terms of assistance. Going quickly to what we do on the ground, I would just like to mention that we are moving a little bit away from the typical assistance in terms of projects that we have done for a long time under IPA, the Instrument for Pre-Accession. You may be aware of the growth plan for the Western Balkans and the reform agenda, which is associated to this new facility from the European Commission. Also very generous package of assistance. It's 6 million in total. Okay, only 2 million, only 2 million are of funds that are not to be returned, and the rest is about loans. And in the context of that, a big chunk is about digital. We have targets about digital identity wallet and targets about the development of electronic public services. I will not go into too much details. I think so far we have had areas where countries have been successful, areas where countries have been less successful, and the overall methodology now of assistance from the EU side is shifting to this policy dialogue whereby there are set objectives in consultation between the EU and the countries, and when they are reached, there is a price tag to it, so there is a reward, if you like, to the country for having done what we agreed should be done. I would skip this part and just go to the broader lesson in the end, which I found for myself, thinking that the digitalization must begin with the user, in line very much with the title of this conference, Citizens First. You know, we think about administrations simply digitalizing what exists on paper. And I think this is, again, the incorrect approach. First, before digitalize, we should think of simplifying and humanizing, as again they say in Portugal. I love this three-word slogan of their technical agency. It's, I think, digitalize, simplify, humanize. And I think we probably do, or at least we focus only on the first, digitalize. So the better approach would be to ask, what is the citizen trying to achieve? What does the business need to complete? What information does the government already have? Which steps are unnecessary? Only then should the digital service be designed. And my sort of 5 priorities, but I can see that they are very much in line without knowing it with those that were presented just a few minutes ago. The first one would be make citizen testing a normal part of service design. But as I said, not by law, by convincement. Not only consultations after decisions are already made, but testing with real user before a service is launched. Second, publish service performance data, processing times, number of requests, user satisfaction, complaints, and improvements made when what gets measured can be improved. And what is published builds trust. Third, prioritize high-impact services. for this agenda to take off. So start with services used by many citizens, services that affect vulnerable groups, and services that create unnecessary costs for businesses. Fourth, invest in people and not only in platforms. Western Balkan countries need developers, service designers, cybersecurity specialists, and civil servants who understand both the law and the user experience, because a small team can launch a portal, but a strong system is needed to maintain it and maintain overall trust. Fifth and last, keep inclusion at the center. Digital first must not become digital only. Citizens with lower digital skills, people in rural areas, older people, people with disabilities, vulnerable groups must not be left behind. Good public service means offering digital access, but also assisted and accessible channels. And to conclude with one thought, the next phase of public administration reform in the Western Balkans, I think, should not be judged only by the number of strategies adopted, portals launched, or services counted. It should be judged by the experience of a citizen who asks, did the administration make my life easier? I think that's the basic question, and that is the meaning of citizen first. So, of course, I'm happy if I can to answer any question you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Orlando. Thank you also for reminding us that we are not alone and that we are not so much lagging behind the EU countries, because this is refreshing to hear that you have some similar issues. I think takeaways from both of your addresses is that inclusiveness is really important, that there are diverse groups in society that need to be consulted in order to have really co-created services that serve the interests. And I think this is where this intervention that was supported by Weber, the design, with the design thinking methodology really comes into place, because this is something that has been widely used in terms of including various groups in society. Also, I find it very important that you all mentioned that we should not digitize bureaucracy, but rather firstly and primarily simplify the administrative procedures. So this is where our focus, I think, also should be in the forthcoming period. I have a lot of questions for all of you, but I think we can take up the discussion tomorrow. Now I would like to open the floor for questions by the audience. Please.
Okay, hello. My name is Božidar Jović. I'm from Brčko district, Bosnia and Herzegovina. A question for all of you. We have a huge problem with corruption. Corruption is cancer of our society, not just in Bosnia, but in all West Balkans countries, but in whole Europe, because people are corrupted by default. So basically, do you think that digital transformation of society can be the tool against corruption? Because you can't pay algorithm to finish the job for you. You can't charm algorithm. Algorithm actually is maybe a solution, but in Brčko district and in Bosnia and Herzegovina, unfortunately, we are 5 steps behind the region countries when the digital transformation is about. So my question, is the algorithm or digital transformation maybe the best tool to fight against corruption?
Would you like to address the question to someone specifically, or?
For all of them.
Maybe I can offer a thought also on this, and just for a change, not to refer to Montenegro, which of course is not exempted, as you said, like other countries, to this phenomenon, this negative cancer, as you called, but to Albania, where also corruption is present. And I was there for 6 years. I was doing a similar job, but exclusively at the local level. They had at the time, it was 2015, adopted a decentralization strategy, and I came exactly to help them to implement this and to provide some assistance. The answer to your question is yes. I don't know if it's the main, certainly is not the only, but it is certainly one of the factors to help reduce, if not eliminate corruption. Why am I saying that? Again, not from the theoretical or from the podium, but I'm trying to be very concrete and very pragmatical. For instance, we had in the municipalities, 61 in Albania, so-called one-stop shops, these front desks, which were like physical location, very visible in the whole of the municipal building, that essentially replaced all the steps and all the different rooms that as a citizen you would go until then, door by door, person to person, maybe envelope by envelope, because you had to convince all these people in order to get something you were actually entitled to. That is your right. This is what was the normal practice. After this changed into this one-stop shop, this front desk, you would go as a citizen to this one person, which is extremely exposed, visible, and you would place the request with him or her, and you would leave. And the rest would be an internal back office system, chain of steps, which you would have nothing to do with. So all the red tape was completely cut. And in the end, you would be notified that this chain has completed its circulation and that your service is ready for you to be picked up. So there are methodologies, and digitalization is, of course, one aspect that helps very much to eliminate corruption. So this is just a very practical example that I saw with my own eyes that made corruption more difficult, at least, and the life of citizens much easier. Less costs, less time, less travel, less hassles, less. And then you still have, this is the other aspect of it, the citizen also has to be ready to respond, to take advantage of this offer, because the culture, again, is harder and takes longer time to change. You can do digitalization in a short time, but the people still think with the mind of yesterday. You had the old person, which was coming with a basket of eggs and maybe a live chicken, searching for the door of the mayor because that's the way he's going to get the service. That's not really corruption, but it's just how the people think. But that's also consequently changing, with maybe a little bit longer time. So extremely helpful to fight corruption among many other positive elements. This is my opinion and my experience.
Well, very briefly, I needless to say that you are absolutely right. It's a big issue, not just in the region. I just want to recall that very recently, I believe in March, the Anti-Corruption Integrity Outlook 2026 of the OECD was published. And just to share you a number, there are different estimates, of course, but the estimates that exist point to 8 to 25% of the global public investment may be lost due to mismanagement and corruption. And we are talking about a huge amount of resources. I know, we all know that anti-corruption is a fertile ground for big proclamations. I think I'm a supporter of Orlando's recommendation that we may start with very sound decisions. And the first one that I think is very interesting, and this OECD report I just mentioned highlight, is that enforcement alone is not the solution. Not just because it's very costly to keep an enforcement structure, but because enforcement many times only acts after the problem is created. So adoption of transparency and integrity measures that by default, for instance, in the creation of a procurement platform where bids are publicly announced, where the names and the information about the contenders are visible, by definition create conditions for an accountability without necessarily needing to wait for a problem to emerge. So by default, you create this kind of solutions, and I think in this case, transparency may be a good complement to more forceful measures. Another point I want to mention is that trust services and the European Commission, there is this huge investment not just on electronic identity, but also on digital wallets, on interoperability. The fact that we are able to cross-ref information, the fact that we are able to provide trustful signatures will, by definition, make it harder for some of these issues even to emerge. So what I want to mention is that we are not condemned only to have reactive approaches to corruption. We can, by supporting a human-centered service design, by supporting a responsible, secure digital infrastructure, be also on the way of preventing many of these measures. So it's a more positive note I would like to give.
I would just like to add one sentence from the experience of implementing digital services that we did so far, is that we included in the discussion since the very beginning of the creation of new services, the public administration officials, because they needed to understand why the services were implemented, and of course they needed to understand that they would be monitored in every single step that involves them. Every time there would be a timestamp of who is accessing the service. They would be monitored in the changes that they make to the documents and everything. So it was a kind of preventative measure. On the other hand, they needed to understand that they had to give up some of their discretionary rights for decision making within the institutions because of digitalization. So in my opinion, from the experience, is that yes, digitalization can of course, aid anti-corruption measures. Of course, please.
The thing is that the corruption is actually a human factor. And if we remove human factor from the service as much as we can, or we simplify the service, so instead of waiting for like 15 papers in the municipality, we will also reduce the rate of corruption. And there's this, I think the main problem is that in the region, the bribe is a way of life and a part of the culture, unfortunately. That's something that we needed to fight. I remember like 10 years ago, there was this organization in Bosnia and Herzegovina that had a really simple project. They made badges that said, I don't take bribe. And the only activity was that they went to the state-owned hospitals and tried to give those badges to the doctors and the nurses. And more than a third refused to take it or wear it. So this is something that will probably mostly be solved by, first of all, introducing the digitalization of services, and second, and maybe more importantly, simplification of services. When you have, as you mentioned, when you have a contact with one person, so that person is exposed. So it's actually stopping them from taking bribe. And thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please, one last question, very brief. Oh, okay.
Thank you. My name is Ioan Ilemic. I'm the team leader of the EU for PAR project here in Serbia. But I also have worked in the OECD Sigma, and I wanted to comment on the last discussion as having done a couple of rounds of assessments in the service delivery area in Albania. And I think since Albania was mentioned several times, it's an interesting case in the context of kind of cutting off the corruption by eliminating what they called the service delivery agency, basically, the desks on the ground, by essentially making certain services available only digitally. And obviously the argument was that this will reduce corruption, and I assume it may have done so in some way. The flip side of the coin, obviously, is that it also reduced the accessibility to the services. And I think this is what was also interesting reading this service delivery and digitalization booklet, that citizens clearly have mentioned that as a factor. The issue, though, there is that they do say that objectively the accessibility of services has been reduced, but what doesn't come out from this study is like whether this is actually considered also as a problem. We can only assume that for certain citizen groups, it probably is. People with less digital skills, movement disabilities, et cetera, et cetera. But in the big picture, was that trade-off worth it? I think that's an interesting question that still needs to be studied further. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for this comment. Maybe Milena, yeah, you can also wrap it up.
This is just a quick reflection on some of the comments and questions, which I just wanted to take up. Bruno had the interesting, well, maybe they're semi-rhetorical questions, the ones that you posed, but still I just wanted to reflect on them. On the trust in government, I definitely feel that the results here are related to the trust in government. We see, for example, that in Kosovo, we systematically have higher scores on all public perception surveys, even where we know that according to the actual data, the systems and performance of the administration is not as good as in maybe some other administrations, but simply people have higher trust in the government, in the state, and that is reflected in the public perception data. And then, on the other hand, we usually have Bosnia and Herzegovina, lately also Serbia, more and more trailing these public perception surveys, also because the lack of trust in the government. And on the other question on why, on targeting of the specific audiences, of course, I mean, if we had more money and if we could do separate survey of, for example, persons with disabilities or vulnerable groups, that would be ideal. But since we were aware of this issue, this is, for example, why in the revision of our methodology, we moved from surveying civil society organizations at large to specific and targeted key informant interviews. So, for example, in the area of service delivery and digitalization, we tried to target specifically people who deal with rights of persons with disabilities and with accessibility issues, because we wanted to probe into those issues. It's, of course, then an interview with 3 interviews with just 3 people, but still those 3 interviews are much more informing than a general survey where what we could see is that, again, it was the civil society organizations were punishing the administration for everything. So then we would get the complete opposite of what, for example, we observed in some of the public perception surveys, that even where there are some good practices of the governments, the civil society would give extremely low assessments.
It's a perception issue.
And one more thing that I wanted to pick up from what Orlando spoke about, and you spoke about you said that we should not legislate obligations for the administration, for example, to collect and use feedback from the users. But the thing is that in our region, we have somehow come to the understanding that unless things are regulated, they will never happen. I mean, even regulating them won't guarantee that they will happen. But if they're not regulated, they will hardly happen. Or what we have also observed through the 10 years of Weber research is that some early, very positive practices in some institutions were later dismantled by successor governments just because they were not institutionalized, there was no obligation, and then, you know, when the people changed, simply some good practices disappeared. So I think that this was the reason why we kind of relied also on the legislating. We are aware that it is not ideal to legislate things like this, but we come from this understanding that, you know, legislation is definitely not sufficient to ensure things, but it seems to be like a necessary precondition if we want actually to see some systemic changes, unfortunately.
With our very strict legal cultures, yeah, this is what happens. Do you have a question or comment or? Okay, and then we can wrap up. Thank you.
I'm Stanka Parać, coming from Local Democracy Agency Subotica. And basically have this perception from, how to say, a bottom-up approach, you know, coming from the local level. I wanted to refer to what actually Milena mentioned at the end of her presentation now. And I would like to hear from you as well the comments about general administrative capacities in the region to implement, not only to adopt the legislation, but to implement the decisions and offer the certain list of services to the citizens in a long run. So those services, as citizens, we should consider them as predictable ones, but what happens in reality is that you might, as a citizen, receive or get a service when it is introduced, but it is not, how to say, a rule that the next time you ask for the very same service, that you will get it. So there are different examples, and I don't want to mention them now, but this is something that is actually happening now. So there are, of course, different reasons for that. So how this retention of the people, are they motivated in the administration to perform the job for the salary they receive? And of course, if you have the satisfied citizen with one service received, and then you don't get the same service after some time, actually you lose the trust once gained. So I would just like to hear from you the comments about this. So we have that, this is the problem, this is really the problem, considering first of all the a long-term administrative capacity which would be ready to not only to implement the legislation they adopted, but also there is another challenge they are facing now, I would say, and that is the rapid change of the environment and situation both in the countries, but of course also related with the political will, let's say so. So, so my general comment, or also the quest, is related with the administrative capacities as such in the Balkan, in our region, and compared to, let's say, the experiences in some EU countries, who, according to our knowledge, are much more, how to say, adaptable to changes, to rapid changes, and it seems that we are not. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for this. Again, you mentioned this lack of administrative capacities resulting in inconsistency, resulting in decline in trust in government. So maybe with this we can also wrap up. You can reflect to this comment and wrap up on everything that has been said. Please, very briefly.
So I will be very, very briefly, and we can pursue the conversation later or tomorrow. So no. So well, thanks for the comments. Thanks for this last question. I will very briefly insist on this. So two things. The first one is predictability and burden creation are of course very important elements when we are designing services. I will just give you one interesting number from a recent OECD initiative called Simplifying for Success, where for businesses, the perception that exists is that the costs of complying are bigger than the costs of actually committing to the regulation, to the demands of the regulation. And this is a huge question when the cost for the businesses of addressing the requirements of the government are bigger than simply what is being asked for them to pay for. This is extremely an important point that calls for simplification. We mention usually simplification, and correctly, from a human-centered perspective, from the perspective of the user. But simplification also applies to the public administration efficiency itself. What I want to say is that when we are discussing capacity, the first idea is that we need more capacity. Maybe we need to use better the resources we have. And when we are talking about simplification, we are talking about making life easier for businesses and for citizens, but also for making our public administration more efficient, so our resources, even if they are not bigger, they can be better allocated. And I will just give you a couple of examples. For instance, the biggest issues that exist in using digital tools for simplification are not due to the lack of capacity, skills, of funding. They are due to the lack of quality of data. Which means that when we are discussing capacities and existing capacity, if we improve the quality of the data that we have, we can leverage some solutions that will make the discussion about the capacity in place different, completely different. But until we solve these issues, we will keep discussing the question of the capacity. I'm not sure if I'm making myself clear, but what I want to make sure is that when we are discussing capacities, we are discussing also this question. And the other thing about something you said about the rapid change. It's true, things are changing rapidly, and it's very hard to keep predictability under these circumstances. Quite very often, I think it's counterproductive to keep things without changing if the needs and the behaviors of people are changing, if the opportunities we have are changing as well. And with that regard, I think there are two things that we can keep in mind, is that the instruments we use ourselves to manage the public administration need to change accordingly. For instance, we can keep funding the traditional way, but we can, as the European Commission has been promoting, funding using outcomes-based funding. We are not funding that you do this or that. We are funding that you achieve that result. So things can change, but the outcome will always be there. The opportunities may change, the challenges may change, but in the end, you are delivering the same. You are improving the satisfaction. You are improving the speed of the service. You are not buying technology X, because technology X may be outdated in 6 months. So changing this instrument changed completely the discussion about predictability. And the second thing I want to say is that, and I think that resonates with something very important that Orlando was saying, is that what's the point of throwing one project after the other if we are not managing the products? And product management is equally important, because what we are creating today needs to be updated, needs to be managed by someone, needs to have a governance structure in place, needs to have responsibilities, needs to have accountability, needs to have a satisfaction and citizens or users' feedback. So product management needs to be in place. If we keep just managing projects one after the other, it's how we call in Portugal, dead by delivery. You are delivering so much things that in the end you have a whole array of solutions, do not communicate with each other, you are probably repeating what others are already doing, and you are never making a good use of your resources. So adapting to the rapid change is not just a matter of quantity, it's also a matter of how you are approaching this in this way. Sorry for taking a little bit more time than expected.
Just to add something complete also from my side, without being too long, I just feel I want to give 3 reactions briefly. One was from the gentleman that unfortunately had to leave, but for general consumption, I still want to reply to that point about Albania when the one-stop shops which helped reducing corruption were basically with the decision from one day to the other completely shut down and replaced by a completely digital service. We were saying the same thing. I mean, my fifth takeaway was exactly that. Keep inclusion at the center. That's what I wrote and what I said. Digital first must not become digital only. So if anyone thought, and we know who thought that, and he had the legitimacy and the power to do it, that having digital only would be backed by the point that corruption would be even less than having the one-stop shops, might have achieved that particular objective, but that was at the detriment of accessibility of services, because what about all the people in the villages? What about all the IT illiterate people, the old people? So you, in decisions, political decisions, you always have to choose. So yes, we have even less corruption, but to the cost of leaving someone behind. I'm afraid that I'm not afraid, I'm pretty sure I say with correctness that that would not be the EU line. In terms of this social policy, etc., etc. But still, that was what happened. But so I said, digital first, yes, but it doesn't mean digital only. So it was essentially the same thing. To Milena, quickly, I am totally with you. I know the real politics tells us that, especially in the Balkans, you need this transitionary period, and although they might happen only because they are imposed by law, and they shouldn't be in general, you need that or it doesn't happen at all. But my point is, and you know that, if you impose it by law, then it will happen because it has to happen. And then what happens is the strict, the tick-the-box exercise. So is that what we need? Of course not. So it's an intermediate step. I mean, what I said was, and I say this again, the real sustainable solution, the structural solution, will be when this happens without the need to have legal obligation. But of course, in real life, I know that this measure might be needed to make it happen, although partially, in some cases, maybe not simply really as a fully just tick the box exercise, so we understand each other. And to the lady from Subotica, I think we need to entertain this discussion in a separate session, because this is the big, big elephant. This is the Pandora box. This is not the elephant in the room. This is the public administration reform. And I would just plea all other countries to reflect on what's happening now in Montenegro and to learn a bit the lesson before 5 minutes before 12. Because what is happening now in Montenegro is that everybody, including us, realize that administrative capacities are key, that administrative capacities are weak, and we are running around, we are filling the gaps, and we discovered that 40% of benchmarks in the totality depend on administrative capacities. So please realize this a little bit sooner, help yourself, because public administration reform is not just about numbers. Is not the answer to your question is not that you get 10 more people. You know, in Montenegro, we have maybe necessities in some ministries. I hope Zorica doesn't tell me I'm speaking nuts, but in some ministries, you might need more people. In other ministries, you maybe have too many people. In all ministries, maybe you don't have the proper management of the people. You don't have a retention policy appropriate. You have to improve it. Maybe you need a salary scale reform. Maybe you need to look at the appraisal system. You know, and when people tell me people are only drinking coffee, it's not the problem of the people who are drinking coffee. Where are the managers? Where is the senior manager there? Are the people placed properly? Are they doing what they are best at? So the issue is very big and is not quantitative, is at least equally qualitative, but I think it's more qualitative than quantitative. So please, you know, the reform of the public administration is really fundamental. The sooner the better. because when you reach then the close point to the accession might be very late, and the thing is just going to accelerate. If you have weak capacity just before entering, you may risk that you will have even weaker when you enter. Because what happens, and I will conclude here, otherwise I spread the panic, the good people, not maybe so many, that you have in the weak already administration, will probably be those that will go to Brussels. And then you have even weaker administration. So,
Thank you.
but we can talk about this
We really need to wrap up.
separately. Sorry
Iris,
for being a bit
please.
long.
Thank you.
I'm gonna make a really short point. This is something that even though we deal with this public, we deal in this field, but we also forget that this service delivery, it's actually the interface to the government for the people. And it's something that really impacts their lives. It can really make their life more complicated, or it can make it real easier. And it's really important, but I guess this kind of talk, it's not that popular in media, you know, saying these technical things that our countries should do. But if we take into account what we gained from the European path so far from the reforms, I don't think it really gets to the citizens. But this is something that will get to the citizens, and we actually need to use all our capability as civil society organizations, as institutions. That was a part of my question and comment from earlier in the first part of this conference. We need to really advertise this in the media and really let people know what changes in their life, because they obviously don't know. And I'm finishing by this. I'm going to make another example from Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'm gonna guess the numbers. It doesn't really matter. Like how many what's the percentage of the people of Bosnia and Herzegovina in our poll that think that the digital services are easy to use in Bosnia and Herzegovina? That was like maybe 7 years ago. And 40-something% said they are easy to use. Bosnia and Herzegovina didn't have any digital services at the time. So I'm going to finish by this.
Thank you, everybody. I'm aware that we are very much beyond our time frame, but this was a really interesting discussion, and thank you everybody for wrapping up in the end on connecting all the various actually PAR efforts and measures that we're all doing in our countries, and especially emphasizing this capacity building for having administrative capacities to deliver on all of these reforms, with the purpose of actually achieving a resilient public administration in all of our countries, attaining actual outcomes, positive outcomes for citizens. So thank you again to everybody that stayed also, and we'll take up the conversation tomorrow.